And we're live. Welcome back to another Corona Geek here, where we talk all about mobile app development using Corona SDK. I'm your host, Charles McKeever. And today, just the two of us. We can code it if we try. What's that?
Who's you, me, myself, and I.
Me, myself, and I. I was like, Ed has officially lost his mind.
That was a long time ago.
So joining us is Ed Marina from RomanGamer.com. Yay! It's the Muppet Show. And today we're going to talk about the things that we didn't talk about last week, which is creating library extensions, loading data using JSON, and persisting button states. Right? Button persistence. It sounds great when you say button persistence.
This whole discussion started from a lot of people have problems. I've seen this many times in the forums. A user is trying to create a toggle button, basically, where they can turn on and off their sound or some setting in their game. And then they get really frustrated because they say, yeah, I wrote the code and it saved a thing to the file, and then I reloaded it and it was on again. Why is this happening?
Oh.
There's like this little tiny disconnect between the persisting of the data and the making the button respond correctly the next time you load the app.
Well, you said last week that the library extensions, the JSON, and the button persistence all kind of tied together. So I'm looking forward to see how that plays out.
Exactly. Well, the way it ties together is that, what are we talking about here? We're talking about a button in your game that is going to be in one of two states. It's going to be on or off. And you want it to remember what state it was in if the user quits and reloads the game. For example, if they turn the music off, you don't want it to flip the music back on the next time they load the game. They're going to get frustrated with you. So how do you do that? You need some kind of way to keep track of a setting, which implies that we're going to do something with data and with tables, perhaps. We're going to do some I/O to the persistent storage. And all of this relates to existing features that need to be sort of recombined or something. So the easiest way to do it is simply to write some code that does the work, strap it on to existing libraries like the table library or the display library or whatever it is that makes sense, and then to have it in your code forever and ever. And so I thought, well, we could just simply show them how to do the save and the button and we'd be done. But I thought, really, the best way to do this is to start from the front and teach people how to extend existing libraries and then work up from there.
Well, I'm excited about this topic because I really like this idea of being able to create a library, a database, or what am I trying to say? Having your own intellectual property, having this whole building up on what your previous works are, because it's great to be able to grab a snippet of code here or snippet of code there and paste it in and get things moving. But if you have to do that every time for every game, or every app or whatever, then it'd be better like yourself with SSK. You've created a whole brain trust of material that you can just go in and draw from. And I think that's something that as developers, all of us should be trying to do, right? We should all be trying to have this archive of knowledge that we can draw from and speed up our development. So anyway, I think it's a great thing.
Occasionally, I don't tell them all the time, but I say, you don't have to do it my way, but look at what I did and then try to do something on your own that similar, but meet your own needs.
Okay.
Don't be rewriting this stuff every time. So why don't we just jump right into the code? Why don't I do that?
Well, hold on. Before you do that, I want to remind people of a couple of things. Sorry.
Wait, we skipped over that part.
Yeah. One thing to know is that last week we talked about touch coalescing and radial dial timers. Now, if you don't know what touch coalescing is, basically you can think of it as kind of a circuit breaker for the amount of work that you can do between frames. So each time you have a frame, you can kind of squeeze in a certain amount of operations. And sometimes if you try to squeeze in too much, then things can kind of get slowed down. And touch coalescing kind of shortcuts that and says, hey, only do so much work within each frame. And that helps to optimize the overall performance of the app and make it feel responsive and things get done quicker, and blah, blah, blah. So all the details are over on Corona Geek, or actually if you go to youtube.com/Corona Geek, you'll find Corona Geek 144, along with all the other videos that we've released. And you'll also find the discussion about radial dial timers. So if you've seen any of Jason Schroeder's work, jasonschroeder.com, he has a whole timer library over there that uses radials and stuff like that. But last week's discussion was kind of unique in that it used image masks to accomplish it. So it has provided all the code for that, so you can find it on GitHub. So either go look at the show notes on the Corona Labs blog, or just follow from, if you're watching the video, you can click the link to the blog post from in the show notes. So you can find that there. Also, congratulations again to Jason Schroeder, who we just mentioned a moment ago. Jason played, he played the dog out of last month's game. I mean, he just played it until the wheels just fell off, and he earned himself a $50 gift card, which unfortunately turned out to be to Buffalo Wings. He said, "Oh, great, I got a $50 gift card. I could use that on Amazon. That's great." And so I went in and I gave him a gift card, and it said, "Well played." And I was like, "Oh, cool." I gave him a gift card. And he said, "Hey, there's a Buffalo Wings place down the road from my house. So thanks for the Buffalo Wing gift card." I was like, "What?" So apparently the gift certificate or the gift cards in Amazon do different things. I thought they were all just so you could buy stuff on Amazon, because that's what Amazon does, is get you to buy stuff there. But apparently they have some sort of partnership with restaurants and stuff as well. So congratulations, Jason. You have a $50 gift card.
Enjoy those Buffalo Wings.
$50 worth of Buffalo Wings, man. I hope he took a picture of that.
Well, hopefully not all at once.
Yeah, right. Hopefully not all at once. But that's the, now I know, and I won't do that again. So don't worry. If you win this month, you will get a gift card to Amazon proper. And so anyway, this month we're going to play Alone, which is by LaserDog, LaserDog Games, and if you haven't played it, Alone, here's the description right off their page. It says it's a handcrafted, intense survival journey through space. Navigate caves, rip through mountain debris, dodge rocks and comets, and test your endurance as you pursue ever higher scores in this ultra-fast procedural runner. It's available on iTunes, iOS, and Google Play. So we're going to put links to that in the show notes. And it is a paid app, but I think well worth it. Definitely well worth it. It's a great, beautifully designed and executed app. But if you're not into supporting your fellow developers, that's sad, but okay. But there is a free option provided to us by his username in the forums is sysads. His game is called 1.1Target. You can find it on iOS and Android. It's a Corona built app. Both Alone and 1.1Target are Corona apps. And we'll put a link in the show notes to that as well. But that's a free game that you can play if you want to kind of follow along. Now, I will say both of those games either have levels to them, which I think 1.1Target has levels. So you do a certain amount of operations, and then you move to the next level, which the game becomes increasingly harder as you go. And then Alone is kind of the same thing, where you have difficulty levels that you can pick. So you can start out as a sort of a novice, or you can be a Star Ranger or whatever, and things get harder and harder. So the way we're going to work it is we're going to go for high score ultimately. But if you play on the super hard mode and get a high score, then you're going to be the top dog. If you play the highest level, like in 1.1Target, and get a high score, then you will be the top dog there. So just more is better in this case, and so we'll pick that at the end of either the end of the month or beginning of beginning of July. I think we'll announce it in the beginning of July. So just check the show notes for that and go play those games and have fun, and good luck to you. And then one last note here is that the Udemy course from Daniel Williams is still out there, still available. He's still talking about developing Corona SDK apps in 2015 using ASO and ads. So if you're interested in creating a game, you want to see how to put buttons on the screen, and you want to see how to move players around and keep score, and you also want to do a little bit of app store optimization and add ads in it, monetize that app, then go check out the link in the show notes to Daniel's app. And when you do, go use the coupon code CoronaGeek, all one word, and you will be able to get the course for $9, which is a steal. I mean, even at the full price, I mean, even if you don't use the coupon code, it's still a steal. So go check that out. It's lots of great material. And Daniel walks you through everything. And all the videos are like super short, so there's never a point where you kind of sort of space out. Everything is action-oriented, so you're really walking through a project, and each video helps you step you through the process, so you can follow along, no problem. Any other announcements? Anybody got anything? Brian, hey, welcome to the conversation.
I finally got those games published to the app stores.
Oh yeah?
I ran into a problem. So I did an experiment on 4 games where I wanted to monetize the games, and I was trying to figure out a good way to do it. And what I decided to do was to have ads in the game, but if you wanted to disable the ads, instead of saying, here, pay me 99 cents to disable the ad, I said, I'll tell you what, watch one video ad, and I will turn the ads off for 10 minutes. So it's an experiment.
Yeah.
So
rewarded,
we'll see how it goes.
Rewarded ads.
Yeah, it's a rewarded ad that basically just says, don't bother me for 10 minutes. I just want to play the game.
And you manually coded that up, huh? You figured out how to do that yourself, or?
Yeah, it's not that hard. It's just a ad library, a couple of ad libraries, my own ad libraries.
Oh, okay. Because that's one of the things that's in Fuse powered. You know, that has been soft launched. There's a plugin for it for Corona. Mm-hmm. Basically, the idea is to be able to do, you know, your typical static sort of interstitial ads, video ads, rewarded ads, things that are like in-app purchase, you know, those types of things. But everything's kind of
tied together.
Well, yeah, it's all kind of tied together, but it's kind of tiered. So you can stack things on top of each other. So if somebody can, like, you could show somebody a static ad, or you could show them a rewarded video, and then if they take some kind of action, and like you said, they get something in the game. And then if someone is makes a purchase, then you can say, hey, you know, show this if the person's made a purchase, and then show this if they haven't, and all that kind of stuff like that. So all that sort of stuff is built into Fuse. So it's interesting, you know, that you're following that same path. You're just having to code it up all yourself.
Yeah, I wish I had somebody else code it up for me.
Well, that's the idea behind Fuse, right? Is it's going to be. Yeah.
I was waiting for it, but I didn't get in. I just said, I pulled the trigger on the thing, and I said, go, and I'll do it. I'll try it later.
I published an app this weekend, and I wanted to put the Fuse stuff in there, but you know, I was kind of like, well, I can push the button to publish now, or I can, you know, I can try to integrate the Fuse stuff in, and I thought, well, you know what, I'm gonna want to do ASO, a little app store optimization anyway, you know, to see how my keywords play out and all that kind of stuff like that. So I know I'll be wanting to do some updates pretty soon, so I'll just do it then. So that's what I did.
That's basically, I said I gotta pull the trigger. I just gotta pull the trigger. I can do it on the next one. Yeah,
do it now or do it later. You're sitting there, you're like, yeah, let's go. Just go.
That's the problem I got into. Is I kept saying, well, I got to make this little one more change. I think I'll try. Maybe I'll try this. The ad's like 6 months later. It's not out. Yeah. Like, oh, come on.
Yeah, same thing here. I had a couple of iPad-centric things that I was like, I wish that was aligned a little differently on the iPad. You know, and I just saw it just like the last moment sort of thing when I was making screenshots and stuff, and I was like, you know what? If I stop now to go back and adjust that,
it'll be a week.
It's never going to get published. Yeah, it's going to be another week, 2 weeks before I get back to it. So I was like, okay, look, let's just push the button, and I'll just note it as something that needs to be updated, and it'll be an update. So
yeah, I'd rather get more games and apps out, and later experiment with something new instead of constantly trying to get it just right for the one that I have done.
Right. Yeah. So. Exactly. All right. Well, let's talk about. Hey, whoop. Yeah. Hey, Brian. You're on. You're officially done with the college scene, right? You're on a summer vacation, right?
I'm on break now, but yeah, there's still stuff happening that have to go in regularly for meetings. You know, it sounds all nice. All you do is teach. No, that's.
Oh, I see. So the students are done with you, but you're not done with.
Exactly.
All that. Okay, I got you. Yeah, I know people always talk about, teachers get a summer break, and I'm like, really? They don't really get like.
I'm looking forward to that.
So let's talk about library extensions and all that kind of stuff. Let's get right into the conversation here.
All right, we'll do that. So I'm going to change the starting point a little bit because I forgot to mention this, and it would have been a waste to mention it twice. What we're going to look at first is an extraction from SSK, and then we'll go ahead and look at updating. All of the stuff we're looking at first is extracted from SSK to demonstrate the principles of what we're talking about. And I realized when I was looking at this code that people would be a little bit confused, and so I'll explain. One of the things I see people do all the time is use the function remove self, and then they get into trouble when they call it twice accidentally. So what can happen is somebody will call object remove self, and the object gets removed, and then later in their code they've made a coding error, which is it's no problem. I mean, people make coding errors, but then they call it again and the game crashes, or the app quits, or it throws a dialog box up and says, what the heck are you doing, And the problem is that object remove self is not really smart. Once you've called it, everything on the object gets stripped off except for the Corona table stuff or the Lua table stuff. That hangs around, but all of the display object code is removed. The function itself is gone, and so when they try to call it the second time, the function doesn't exist anymore, and that's what causes the crash. Now, there's another function called display remove, which is a function that's part of the display library, and this is where we're going to get into the extending things bit. But this was added sometime later. I don't think it existed initially, but it came around pretty soon after. What I'm trying to say here is remove self was always there, and I think they added display remove a little bit later. And this is superior in that what you do is you say display remove and you pass the object handle in, and it's smart. It says if this thing doesn't exist, don't do anything. So if you pass in nil or you pass in an object that's already been removed, you're safe. It's not going to do anything bad. So now I tell people in the forums all the time, don't use remove self, use display remove. The only reason you would have wanted to use remove self in the past was because previously that was the only way to access the finalize event, but recently the staff have fixed this so that if you use display remove, finalize is also called. Okay, so let's just forget about that. I just wanted to explain why this next bit of code is coming up here. So what I'm going to show you first is some extensions that I've made in SSK to serve my own purposes. And the first of these is I do some kind of complicated things in SSK, and I play a little bit loose and wild with event listeners. And one of the event listeners that I use a lot that causes a lot of problems if you're not careful is the runtime event listener. So what I like to do is set up custom events that get posted out. What is the word? It's not posting. I call it posting. It is called dispatched. So you can create a custom event listener and listen to it, and then dispatch that event, and all objects that are out there will trigger in on that. Now the problem is that with runtime events, if you don't clean up properly and the runtime event comes along later, that listener will activate and crash your code, basically. You'll run into the same problem. So what I did in SSK was I extended the display remove function, the one we were just looking at, the one I say is superior to remove self, and I added some experimental code that did what I called auto cleaning. Now, we're not going to look at the auto cleaning, but the auto cleaning code basically ran and said, is there a runtime event listener out here that is on this object? Let's go clean that up before we remove it so that everything is copacetic, and if the event occurs later, nothing bad will happen. In addition to that, so let me back up here and actually run the example before we get too far off. Oh, I forgot to mention, I'm going to release the code that we're talking about today, and it's in tips and tricks under the Hangouts folder on the GitHub and under extending libraries. And there's 3 folders: basic, which we're looking at right now; persistence, which is the next evolution of this topic; and then an example using Composer and persistence to keep track of the state of buttons between runs and between loads. So I'm gonna fast forward through this bit. I just want to touch on the highlights of how we do this. So my first example is that I have created a function where I am extending display remove. So we have the display library. Let me bring up the window here. Sorry, there it is. We have the display library. It's got all these functions. That is not the display library. That's a display object. There it is. So display, new circle. We use these things all the time. New circle, new container, and display remove, which is the one that I want to extend. So I have this problem in my code where I wanted to replace the functionality of display remove while retaining what it did, but I wanted to do some extra stuff. So all I did was I wrote a Lua script that at the top it created a new field in the display library called underbar remove. Can you read this code okay? Do I need to make it bigger?
No, it looks good.
Okay, and so what it did was it basically assigns the value of display remove, which is just like a pointer or a reference to the function, and it copies it into this field. So now, if I wanted to, I could literally say...
It's kind of a deep copy sort of thing?
Sorry?
Is it like a...
Literally, what's in this... Okay, when Corona starts up, what it does is it exposes display as a global variable, and attached to it, it's basically a table.
Mm-hmm.
And attached to this table are a bunch of fields: remove, new rect, new image rect, and all of them, all they've got in them is a reference to a function. If you were to literally say, let's do this, let's just do this and demonstrate it instead of talking about it.
I guess my point was, though, that it's copying all the functionality of that.
What it's doing is it's copying a pointer. I say pointer because I think in C, but a reference to the function. So let me just demonstrate what's in there. So if we print display remove, we run this piece of code right here on line 13, and I run this, here's what you're going to see printed out on the console: function and some number. And so later on, when we reference display remove, I cannot type. You know, this is the thing that always goes wrong when I'm doing show demo on the show. I can't type to save my life. Display remove. What we're doing here is Lua says, okay, this is a field, it's a function, where is it? And it goes to this location right here, and it executes that code that it finds there. So if I want to replace this, first what I need to do, undo my changes. The first thing I need to do is make a copy of that so I don't lose track of it. It's sort of like when you're sorting, you're doing like a sort algorithm and you're swapping A and B. Well, you got to keep track of one while you replace the other. And I'm waving my hands around like you can see me. The point here is if I could just simply do this and replace it with my own function, I would totally lose the reference to the original remove. It'd be gone from then on. The user would never be able to call it again. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a temporary, or not a temporary, I'm creating an additional field on the display library called underbar remove, because I know that there's no functions that start with an underbar. And if I'm really worried, I could do this: underbar, 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 or give it some kind of special naming convention so that I know in the future, if Corona changes, there'll be no conflict.
When I take over a native function call, I usually just put a 0 at the end of it, so it'd be display.remove 0. That's just me personally, but that could bite me. Who knows? That could bite me someday.
Now, Ed?
Yeah.
Just to help clarify this, then below that in your code, you have the object dot underscore underscore destroyed and underscore underscore auto clean. That's 2 underscores there instead of just 1, right?
Yeah. My code. This code.
You're just expanding upon what you've just said, that by adding the underscore to there, you've got that stored in a secondary place.
Yeah. The point of doing the underscores or the remove 0 is you want to make sure if you're going to do something like this, you're going to add a field to an existing library or you're going to add a function to an existing library, you want to make sure that in the future, it works today, great, and then you update to the next version of Corona and they've added, so if I did something stupid like this, let's say I said my remove or old remove, and then for some reason, Corona decided, let's add a function called old remove. Well, you just wiped it out, right? So the point of this weird naming business is to ensure that in the future, my code is future-proof. It's not going to destroy some functionality in Corona, and then I'll have a mysterious failure to work. I'll be like, why doesn't it work? Well, because I overwrote it. So back to extending. What are we trying to do here? I'm trying to make a change to an existing function, which is display remove. I want it to do some extra things and everything it used to do. So the first thing I do is I create a temporary place, not a temporary place. I keep saying temporary. I create an alternative location to store the reference to the function. I copy it. That's the very first thing I do. And the next thing I do is I simply say display remove the current name, and I assign it a function. And I know that if I look at the reference documentation in this case, let me find it. If I look at it, it takes a single object reference. So the signature of this is it takes in an object reference and that's it. So I got to duplicate that. So I duplicate that, takes a single object reference. I'm going to take out my extra code here. And then I do some little bits here. This is really unnecessary, but what I check for is I check to see if there's anything in here at all. Actually, it's not. So if they pass in a nil, I return immediately and I do nothing. Or if my flag destroyed is set, I do nothing. And so what I'm doing in my extension here is I'm removing the object, and then I'm setting a flag I use elsewhere in SSK to keep track of some details. And this flag is simply says, hey, you destroyed this already. You don't need to do anything with it. So if I put my old code back here, this old code, the auto cleaning code, the stuff we're not going to look at, you can look at it, download SSK and take a peek. It does a lot of elaborate stuff. And one of the things it does is it looks for this flag to see if it needs to do the things that it's trying to do. So once it's been set, nothing more needs to be done. So in a nutshell, create a place to copy the function pointer if you're replacing a function, and then make your own version of the function, and then within the function, call the old one by simply referencing it. You'll notice that it says display underbar remove, so we're calling the thing that is stored here, which is actually the old remove. So we're doing the removal just like we used to, and then I extended it. I did something different. In this case, I set a flag, and I was done. Another extension that I made in SSK is, like I said earlier, I play a little loose and fast sometimes when I'm doing my coding, and I always run into a bit of a problem with my Enterframe listeners and other runtime-based listeners. So one thing I like to do is I like to verify that the object that I'm about to manipulate still exists. The display object has not been removed previously. And there was no function at the time that I was doing it to verify that. So I simply added a new function called isValid that takes an object pointer, and I attached it to the display group, or the display library. So later I could simply say display And if I had a object called Bob, then I'd say is valid Bob. And it would look at Bob, and the first thing it would do is say, did you pass in a nil? So is it nil? Is it not set at all? Okay, that's not good. That's false. So it returns false. But if it exists, it checks to see, is it marked as destroyed? If it's marked as destroyed, then it is in fact valid, and it returns true. Well, it has to not be nil, it has to not be marked as destroyed, and the function remove self has to exist. It's a little excessive, but it's like all these things I like to check for, because I know that if any one of these is false, so if remove self is not set on the object, that means it's been destroyed. If my flag is set to true, that means it's been destroyed. And if they pass in a nil, that means it definitely has been destroyed or it's invalid. Go no further. So, but the point is I simply added a new function to the display library because I needed it, and it was that easy. So I require this file, which is the one we were just looking at, display. Run it one time. Go ahead.
And if I could just point out real quickly, something that beginning students or people that are brand new to using Corona, there's a comment somewhere in the documentation that talks about being able to associate a function with a table. And that's basically what is being done here, is that we've got the display object and we're giving it a table assignment, the dot is valid or the dot remove. And this would be an example of a table or a function assigned to a table object. So
right.
in case somebody's new to this and they've wondered about that, these are excellent examples of functions being assigned to a table object.
Right.
Yes.
People think of tables like this.
Yes.
This
but is also a table.
Yeah, this is
and I realize that's just a little off topic of what you're doing, but it is an excellent example of using or assigning a function to a table object.
Yeah, I use it all the time. In fact,
yes.
This is basically what you're doing when you create your own personal modules. You create a table at the top, you add a bunch of fields for keeping track of data, you add some fields that point to functions, that is, you do exactly what I did right here. And then at the very end of the file, the module file, you return the table. So if we forget about all this at the top, and we did bill, so we return our module bill. Bill now has entry 1 is set to 100, and it's got a function on it called do it. We just created a bill module. Mission accomplished. So you did get a little far off topic there, but that's fine.
Well, hopefully it'll clarify something in case somebody's ever wondered about that particular.
Yeah, and that's definitely worth pointing out because just as Ed sort of demonstrated, we kind of spelled it out. But if you're not accustomed to that, it's just sort of hidden, right? I mean, that's why every programming language has shortcuts and has nuances to it, and unless you know those things, then you don't see it right away. So it's worth spelling out. That's why, like, anytime I hate seeing. I know that every programming language has shortcuts, and I kind of hate to see them used. I know why people are using them, but I hate to see them used almost because it's almost like a secret club, like a secret handshake kind of thing, right? If you do it, you can all do it in this one line of code. And you're like, yeah, but the 3 lines of code that took weren't that bad at all, either. So why not make it a little more user friendly? All right.
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
No, it's okay. That's good. You gave me a chance to get myself organized here. So I'm now finally going to discuss what we promised to talk about 20 minutes ago. I'm sorry. I wanted to give people, hopefully, something simpler to look at, because what we're going to look at now utilizes several things out of SSK, and I'm not going to give you exactly how each piece works. I'm going to walk you through it quickly, and people can look at this example. All the code's here. It's straightforward. They just need to read it. So what do we want to do? The first thing we want to do before we deal with buttons and keeping track of what the button state was last time is we need to keep we need to find some way to save data persistently. So one of the things that most people do, what I do, is I keep in my games a table of settings for the games. Like, is the volume on? What's the volume level? Is it 50%, 100%? How many coins do they have? What's the user's name? What's the email that they put in for whatever? If I use emails in my game or app, I've got tables, one or more tables that keep data in them. So ideally, I could save this table to the what I'll call the disk, persistent storage, and then later, sometime later when the game or app is restarted, I would be able to read that table in off the disk. We'll just call it the disk for now, and then have all the settings that were previously set in the last session. So how would we accomplish this? Well, there's many, many ways, and in fact, there has been more than one blog post and more than one forums post on this. Rob has done a great example in a prior blog post last year or the year before, and then I started using Corona in 2012, and they were different examples at the time, so I based my own code off of what somebody else did. In fact, if you look hard, you'll see this stuff is not Corona specific at all. You can find examples in the Lua pill and some other locations. There's Lua archives. So let's just go ahead and do it. I'm going to walk you through this code and tell you what it does, and then I will show you some of the code behind it. So in main Lua, there's a function called test extended table. If I run it, as I do below on line 42, what it's going to do is it's going to call this function load, which is attached to table. Now this doesn't exist as part of Corona. This is an extension that I wrote. And it says, find a file called mysettings.json, and if you don't find it, just give me an empty table. So basically what this function does right here is it looks for this file. If it finds it, it will load it off of the disk, convert the contents into a table, and return the table to be stored in my settings. Now if the file does not exist, I have my load function return nil, because I like to use that as a false equivalent. So if it returns nil, what this statement is saying right here, do this or do this. So if the first part is nil, basically what will happen is an empty table will be assigned to my settings. Another extension that I added to table is a function called dump. Now I didn't write dump myself. I took it from somebody else's example and modified it. But basically what it does is it looks at the contents, the first level contents of the table. So if you have a table that's got tables in it, it looks at everything in the first level, but it doesn't dive deeper into the subtables. And what it does is it prints out what's in the names and what's in all of the fields in the table. So if you have a table where Bob, or you have a table where the field it has a name field, and in the name field is Bob, then it will print out Bob equals, or I'm sorry, name equals Bob, etc. You'll see this when I do it. So I print out, the reason I have this statement here is the first time we run it, it's going to print out that there's nothing in here. It's going to print out an empty table. Yeah, that's nice, Sergey. Thanks a lot. I was wondering while the laughing was going on. You guys think I can't see you laughing, but I can see you laughing. Very funny.
We're all snickering at the comments that are going on in the chat on the side.
You're killing me. You know, this is the problem. If you say something, you're later go, I can't believe I just said
Now,
that.
I want to jump in right here. Now, I started using Ed's extension for the table about 6 months ago, and it has dramatically sped up a lot of my app development using the table load, the table save. I tend to use this table print_r over the table.dump. That these are huge time savers in working with complex arrays and tables for more advanced apps. So if for no other reason, get the SSK for the table extensions. They just are such huge time savers.
I just want to say, you don't need to use everything out of SSK. just take the bits and pieces you want. But I encourage, pat myself on the back, whatever. But two functions I use all the time out of the table library are the dumper for printing out what's in the table, because I always forget, or I'm like, why is this not working? Oh, it's because the setting, the function's missing, or the setting isn't set on the table. Well, you don't have X-ray vision. You cannot see what's going on unless you look at the table. And the other function that he mentioned is the recursive print, also not my code. I took somebody else's recursive print and modified it to suit my needs.
And it works great.
I'm also going to
really simplifies things.
Also just want to chime in real quick, and this is slightly off topic, but I just want to point it out in case people who are watching, particularly more novice developers, because I feel like we sort of not glossed it over, but really quickly said, oh yeah, and here's this OR operator which you can do. That's huge. I know for a lot of people, when they get started, their code is very needlessly bloated with lots of if-then statements checking if a value is nil. And I know for me, when you first discover it, you're like, oh my god, I can just save myself so much time and so many headaches. So if you are watching this and you are not using the OR operator in your code, go read about it, go check it out, because it's quick, it's very easy to pick up and start using and understand, but it's one of those things that it takes this much time to understand it, but it saves you just a boatload of trouble.
People coming from C also always are looking for the what they call the ternary operator. This, where there's a test here, and then value A or value B. So they want bill to be equal to value A or value B based on the test. It's a nice shortcut one-liner. Well, you can use that, the equivalent of the or and the and. Look at this. That's the same thing. So, there you go, a little snippet. Never thought we were going to talk about that, but it came up. So, ternary operator in Lua. All right, so we tried to load it. The first time we load it, it's going to be blank. The dump function will print it out. It'll say there's nothing in there. It'll give the name of the table and say, hey, there's nothing in there. So what do? I want to set a score value, which is a random thing I wanted to do here for the example. So my setting score is equal to whatever used to be in there. Let's see. Oh, here we're doing it. I'm doing the ternary operator right now. So I check to see if it exists. If it does not exist, or if it does exist, I set it to whatever's in there now plus 10. So in other words, if the score exists, add 10 to it. If it does not exist, set it to 0. So the first time through here, score will not exist, we'll set it to 0. Then I do another table dump, and now we'll see that there's a value in the table. And finally, I will save it. And I'll use the table save extension, which I wrote and added in SSK. And the code is available in this download. And it will simply save the contents into a JSON encoded table. So just to cut to the chase here, the way we do this is we use JSON encoding to translate the contents of a table into a text value that we can simply write to the disk or read from the disk. So we JSON encode it, write it to the disk as a big long string. Then we want to get the data back. We load it. It's a string. We JSON decode that string, and the JSON decode, I'll show you the call in a minute, returns a table, which then my function returns. Actually, it does a few other things to verify that the data is good. I provide also another function for massaging the data. Sometimes what can happen is if you're storing data in your table where you're using numerically indexed fields and string indexed fields, if you JSON encode that and then JSON decode it, everything will be string indexed after that. And that's not what you want. You want your numerically indexed fields to be numeric again. We talked about this on a previous show.
And all of these files are being saved and loaded from the documents folder, so they are persistent between app.
Right. By default, table load and table save use the documents folder. If I wanted to, I could say system.temporary directory, for example, and that would now look in the temporary directory. But my function by default looks in the documents directory because that's the most common location to save and restore data from. So let's take a look.
I say, everyone will say one thing before you move on. There is what I'd like to see here is that all of this is wrapped up in sort of one line of code. I mean, when you're talking about the dot load and the dot save. I mean, there's all these other things, all these other operations that are going on when the data is either being loaded or saved. But those are all wrapped up in a library somewhere else that you've written. So not only does it help you customize the processing of the data to ensure that you get the result that you want, you're also cleaning up the amount of code that you have to write or include inline in the application. I like seeing that because it makes things easier to reason about, makes it more fluid when you're looking at the code, and you don't have all that stuff is not all in line.
Right.
So nice.
No, that goes to the point that you made earlier, which is I found myself. Well, I knew because I'd worked on other game engines, etc. before, that it was a good idea to have a library of your own. I immediately started writing my own library, which was SSK. But as you said earlier, it's always better to bundle up what you've got and not write it twice. I've said before on the show that I'm a lazy programmer in the sense that I don't like to do it twice. And just so people will look at the code, but I won't uncover it. But line 30, table dump, line 29, my settings where I load it. These 4 or 5 lines of code, depending on how you want to count it, will, if you did this manually, would fold out to over 100 lines of code.
Yes.
So why write 100 lines of code when you can write 5 lines and you know that you got it right because you got all the bugs out previously?
Right.
Yeah.
So here's the documents folder. I just wanted to demonstrate that there's nothing in it before we run this the first time. I'm going to go ahead and run this. I know it's a little bit hard to see because I can't make these bigger, but let's just run it anyways. And you'll see right away that the code ran, we did the save, and boom, my settings JSON showed up in the documents directory. And I'll show you what's in it in a moment. But before we do that, let's just go back through the code. So my settings loaded, table dump. The first dump we see here says table dump. A couple of lines so I can find it when I'm looking through the comments. It says empty, that means there's nothing in there. And then I have this little comment that prints out here. It says my settings after load, so I know that's the one that is here. I make a change. I initially, because it didn't exist, I set score to 0. And then I do another dump of the table, and it says score equals 0. Let's see. My settings after increment. So that's my settings after increment. Then we did a save. So let's take a look at the contents of the file. Pretty simple. Basically, it looks a lot like a table because this is a very uncomplicated one. But you'll see some that have square brackets and some other things. It's great if you know how to edit JSON encoded tables on your own, or you already know JSON. Super. But I would not specifically, I wouldn't mess with these unless you know exactly what you're doing. Because if you mess up the format of this and you try to load it later, the JSON decoder will throw up. It will be unhappy. So, which is great if you're trying to learn. But anyway, so it's very easy to read. It's all on one line of text. The more things we put in here, the longer this line would be. But it would all be one line of text. All right, so let's go ahead and run it again and see what happens. So we ran it again. Now, after the load, it says it was 0. And then as we remember from the code, when it exists, it adds 10. So we added 10. Now, if I go back over here and click, Sublime is going to update, and we'll see what's in the file. Boom, the score is 10. So we saved it, and it's been updated. So we demonstrated there that we were able to save it initially, and then retrieve it later, and modify it again, and save it again. And if we just keep doing this, keep running, now we have a score of 110. It's the easiest game in creation. All I got to do is reload it. And I got an idea for a game. Simplest game ever. Just keep reloading the game. Better than a one-touch.
And it shows an ad each time.
Yeah, an ad each time before the game starts. Get you prepped. You got to give me something for that score. Okay, so let's take a look at the code. This is where we're really going to blaze, and then we're going to go do something more interesting. The more interesting for me is persistence, and I think we're not going to get to doing the buttons, but let's do the persistence today because I want to really demonstrate that for people who want to dive into the code. But before we do that, let me just take a look at how this was created. So, table load, you will find a folder called extensions under the basic example. In there, you will find a file called table.
And now, Ed, where is this located? This is in the files that they can download, or is this part of SSK?
This is part of what? Yes, this is part of what they can download. It's in the basic folder, in a folder called extensions, and in here you'll find table, string, IO, and display. Now, display was the one I used earlier just to intro us, maybe roughly, into the concept of extending. But all of this example we're doing now relies upon IO, string, and table. And here's the part I want to demonstrate. These all come from SSK. I simply copy them over. So if you want to get the latest and greatest version of these, get SSK, because I'm constantly updating these, and if there's a bug that I find or something that I can do to make it better, I make it better. That said, as I said, this comes from SSK, so there's the SSK statement at the top. I'm not taking that out. First thing it does is it requires the JSON library because I use that for encoding and decoding. I localize the math random just because I use it. Table shuffle, another function that's in here. I'm not going to talk about it. Combine unique. Let's just get down to load. So we'll search for save and load. Here is save. Here's the load. So to create my load function, I simply say function table, which table is a global variable that contains all of the different functions, and I'm not sure if there are any fields on here that are associated with the table library. And I know that there is no table load. Now this is kind of caution for the user. This is one case where I chose not to be safe. In other words, if the guys, Corona staff later on said, hey, we're going to make our own save and load, because this is we can't let Ed have all the glory here. We got to put our own save and load. People need it. Why don't we just put it in there? They could extend table. Problem is, if you load SSK now, I'm going to wipe it out and replace it with my own. But I'm happy with that because I know how mine works. So
it's worth noting though, you could still put in a line of code that says table.load 0 equals table.load.
Yeah, I used
and
to.
You're future-proof in that sense.
I took it out. There used to be. You're absolutely right. SSK used to have a tester in this file that would check to see if it needed to be replaced. I finally said, you know what? I'm just going to keep my own. I'm not going to be safe anymore. So table load takes a file name and a base directory. We pointed this out earlier, where by default it's the documents directory, but I could have put system temporary or system resource directory to load out of the resource directory, for example. I use an existing function in the system library to convert this file name into a full path, and then I pass that into IO open. I locate it, I get the file handle, that is I open the file, and let's see. The big magic here is I read the contents of the file right here into a temporary or a local variable. I close the file just to be clean, and then I decode what was in there, so contents, and I put it in new table, and then I simply return it. So if anything goes wrong up to this point, what I'm going to return is nil. Or, if I couldn't open the file, I return nil. I could have probably just done this. I'm not going to do it. So, let's take a look at the dumping function, because we used it. And this is the reason why IO and string are in here. I would not have included IO or string, but I very, very much wanted to use the function for dumping out the contents of the table. However, as you can see, the dumping function is a lot more complicated, and it uses extensions to the string library. It uses a padding extension to the string library, and I think I skipped over it. Did I use IO exists?
So basically, these are just the dependencies for that. Okay.
So these are included. IO and string libraries are included purely because the table library uses some of my extensions. If I didn't include them, it would not work. But the key values, the key functions you probably want to look at so far are load. It's a very simple function, but you can see it's like, I don't know, 15 lines of code. And save. And save is like 10 lines of code. So you can write this 10 times, or you could write it once by doing an extension. So let's talk about persistence, which is the next example. What is persistence? Let me bring up the code in the example. Persistence, yes. Got to make sure I got the right one. And okay, so what is persistence? Persistence is taking, basically we've already done it. We've created some data that we store on the disk and we restore it later. But one of the things that is missing out of that equation is ideally you can set up some default values. But how do you go about that? One way to do it is in your code you could load the table and then you could look for every field where you want a default value and you could set it and then save it. But that seems kind of wasteful to me. I thought, why? I used to do that all the time. I would write my code where I used my own load and save, and I would write a function that would check to see, is this value set? Is this value set? If it's not set, set it to this value and save it. And I finally said, wait. Mr. Lazy, you're not even following your own maxim here. So I wrote another library called rgpersist, which is also part of SSK. And all it did was it used my extensions to the table library and it added a little more functionality. And the way it works is if you look in folder 2, this is what we're looking at now, 2 persistence, you'll see that it contains a main.lua and a init.lua and then 2 files called test1 and 2. It's also got the other build settings and stuff, but those are not related to the example in the sense of what we're trying to discuss. So what does this main Lua do? I do my normal stuff. I get rid of the status bar. I set the buffering the way I like it. I set a variable that's used by SSK for the default game font. And then I load SSK. So this example uses the entire SSK library. I'm too lazy to separate out the bits for you this time. Sorry. So everything in SSK comes for the ride.
Which I was looking at the folder for the for SSK, and it's only what 566K. So.
Yeah, actually, I thank you for pointing that out. I'll show you something cool about SSK for those who want to know it in the future. It's useful to people who are saying, well, this thing is too big. Okay, so but before I run it the first time, let me. I'm not going to be able to do it. Oh, where is it? I'm trying to locate the sandbox. Okay, forget it. I should have had the sandbox open already. Just trust me that there's nothing in the sandbox right now. So we looked at it on the last example. I'm going to save to the documents folder. There's nothing in there. The problem is because I don't have it loaded, I can't locate it with the file open sandbox. So what do I do here? Line 9 requires the init Lua file, which I just pointed out exists. And in there, what I do is I localize the persist library. So SSK, one thing that I didn't mention before, is SSK is basically a table, and then it's got a bunch of references to sublibraries. So it's like a super library, where SSK is the root, and then persist is its own library, and then I've got an SSK display, which is a library of display extensions and display functions that I've added. So if you were to dump out the contents of SSK, you would see a bunch of tables, which are each of themselves modules or libraries. So as I said, SSK is like a super library containing a bunch of sublibraries. So one thing I like to do in my code is instead of constantly saying ssk.persist.do this, whatever, I say, well, I just want the library. So SSK persist, put it in a local variable, and this is called localization. And now, if I want to call the set default function, which is part of the persist library, I simply say persist set default. And so that's what this function is doing, is I'm setting up the defaults. I create a module, I add a function called run. I could have called it anything. And then in here I do 3 set defaults. I say set default, and the name of the file that I'm going to be saving this in is JSON, settings.json. I want a field called volume, and if it doesn't exist, it isn't set yet, I want it to be set to 0.5. I want to give them 100 coins, and I want to make the email. These are just random things I made up.
Now
this email is Bob at fake email.
This is another case where you've got one line of code, but underneath that is the logic to say if it's not set, right? You're
right. So
only
the
going to
logic behind this does all that. It says, does the file exist? Oh, the file doesn't exist. I need to create it. Does the setting exist? The setting doesn't exist. I need to create that. But it's a little smarter than that. I won't tell you how it's smarter. I instead take a look at the library. It's got additional things that you can say, hey, don't save it yet, because if you're setting a bunch of defaults, you don't want it to be opening and closing the files all the time. So you can say, and so if I were giving this example and trying to show you a complete example of how to do it, I would do this. Because let's just imagine that I had 100 default settings. If I didn't say save equals false, save equals false, the default is, if you set a default value, I use default twice, when you call this function, it immediately opens the file, changes the value, and saves it in a location where it can look it up later. And if you're doing this in your game with 100 settings, that's 100 open and closes, which is really inefficient. So I provided a little flag that you can pass in called save equals false, and it basically says keep track of that, but don't do anything yet. Just keep it in memory, and then on the last one I just make sure that I don't pass anything, because the default is save equals true, and everything I did before gets saved and it's done. So let's just leave that. Hopefully I didn't typo something and mess myself up. Okay, so that's what line 9, we load it, and on line 14 we run it, and at that point the persistent system is ready. It says, I know what the default values need to be, so if I load test 1 and I run it, let's take a look at the code. What do I do here? Localize persist, create a module, I call it test, add a function called run, which in main Lua I am calling test1 run, and in here I simply say, call the persist library get, I say in the file JSON settings, or settings.json, give me the value of volume, give me the value of coins, email, and username. Now, you'll recall that we didn't set username. So let's go ahead and look at test 2, which is loaded in main and executed in main, and then I execute test 1 again. And the reason I did this is because we initialized 3 values, gave them default values. Test 1, its job is simply to print out what the values are, and I'm looking for a username, which does not exist yet. Then we run test 2. Test 2 will modify the volume, it will subtract some coins, and it will set up a username. And then we'll run test 1 again, and we'll see that username then exists. And it's kind of complicated, but simple at the same time. So let me run it. Let's take a look at the console output. All right. Oh, wrong. Let's run the right example. And I knew this would happen. This never fails when you change something before doing a demo. I apologize.
That's all right. We derailed you.
Okay. Just go into the sandbox. This is what I wanted to do originally. Let's get rid of JSON settings.
There we go.
Run it again. Boom. Okay, so I had removed it. It created it when I ran it. And I'll show you what all this junk is at the top. But before we do that, test 1 executes, and it says the volume is 0.5. Let's see, the default was 0.5. Coins is 100. The email is bob@fakemail, and username is nil, i.e. it does not exist. Then I ran test 2. And just for those who didn't see it, I print out little test statements here so I can see that this happened, then I ran this, then I print this out to the console, then I run this, then I print this out, and then I run test 1 again. So test 1, the output. Test 2 doesn't produce output, but it does work. Test 1, and if we look at test 2, I randomized the volume setting and I set it. And so in one line I set the value and I saved it. So if I reload this in a moment, we'll see that if I'm going to reload this, the first statement will print out 0.36, 95, Bob, and Bob the Baker for the username.
So essentially test 2 ran, it just didn't display anything on the screen.
Yeah, it doesn't have a print statement in it. There are no print statements. The job of test 2 is to make modifications. I would have better have named this modifier or changer or something to imply that it was doing this. So let me run it again. And so the values the last time were 0.36, 95, Bob@fakemail, and Bob the Baker. Now we ran it, 0.36, 95, Bob@fakemail, and Bob the Baker, demonstrating that it's done everything that we said it was supposed to do. That data has been safely stored, and this time 0.15, 90, etc. And if we take a look at the file, let me bring up my code editor here, we will see a much longer line this time. Username Bob the Baker, the default stuff, which is part of the library, it's not one of our settings, and then volume 0.15 and coins 90. I feel like something is missing. Okay, so anyways, what was I going to say? Right, you pointed out something about size. One of the settings that comes with SSK is there's a file called, in the SSK folder, there's a file called load SSK. And if you look at it, among other things, is it tells you what the version number is or the date. And it's got a bunch of flags at the top. Now, the SSK library for people to download has it turned off, and it is measure SSK. Usually it's turned off, but in this version I turned it on. I set it to true. And when it is true, you see this print statement come out in the console. And what this is basically telling you, for people who are curious, is that as it progressed, it measured how much memory was used for each library or set of details. So actually, when it set the globals, that took 34K of memory. When I added extensions to the existing table and display, etc., that took 48K of memory. I made some changes for the Android devices, all this stuff. You can see, hey, I like what's in SSK, but I only want to use the global settings or EDS extensions. Well, if I use just that, that's going to cost me 48K of memory. Or if you look at the whole thing, the whole package, which is the way I like to do it, the whole shebang with everything turned on takes half a meg of memory, which seems like a lot, but I challenge you to write all this stuff all the time. You'd be instantly willing to give up half a meg of storage to be able to write your app in 1/10 of the time, hopefully. I know I am. So
yes,
and that is
totally run us out of time.
And that is memory usage. Whereas I think what I was talking about was just the size on disk, right?
The size on disk is a little different. So there's two associated costs. There's persistent storage cost. How much does it cost you to include the library and store it as part of your app? But when it runs, all the functionality it puts into memory also takes up space. So this is the space that is required for the variables, for the function definitions, etc., etc. Another thing I just want to point out, now I'm not perfect, I'm not the best programmer out there, but I'm pretty good, and I guarantee you that newer users, if you try to duplicate some of the things that I've done, you're going to use more storage, more memory than I'm using to do this.
And you're going to lose a lot of time.
Yeah. Just you're wasting your time. For example, the collision calculator, big time saver, RGCC, go use it. Don't calculate your collisions ever again. Just use names.
Now, I spend a whole chapter talking about loading and saving files for persistence, and I think you should read it and know how to do file persistence and how to load and save. But then once you've done that and you understand what's happening, then use SSK's table load and table save. It's just so much easier.
Yeah, it's always a good idea to understand why something is, but then after like you said, after you've done it, you're kind of like, okay, why am I doing this long form? So not a lot of value there. Well, good. I think this is great. So what we've got then is we extended libraries so that we could add additional functionality, and then we looked at putting using SSK to loading and saving JSON data, which in turn gives us the ability to persist that data across sessions. So when we open and close our app, and then so we finished up with a conversation about persistence. So next time, do you want to cover buttons, or do you want to kind of extend that conversation to buttons?
Example. I'm sorry, I should have run it so people at least know what we're talking about.
Well, we can do it next time. I mean, I'm not saying we have to do it now. I'm just saying, like, that would be the next logical step. Is like, how do I tie these two conversations together?
I think that's the next logical step.
Yeah. So I'll show the code next time, but for people who want to jump into it, there is an example that it uses the Composer scene manager, it uses persist, and basically what it does is it has two screens where it's got some toggle buttons, and you click that, and then you reload the app, and which you can't really see that I did that, but the value is set. I mean, it sets the button to the right state, and does the right thing. I don't know how else to describe it. Set the difficulty level to 2 on another screen, reload the app, go to the screen, difficulty level is now 2. I mean, This is what people are trying to achieve, but they bang their heads against the wall, and then they try to write their own code. I'm just saying, don't do it. Right. Take a look at my stuff and derive what you need from that.
Right. Well, I think like most people, it's just again, like Brian was just saying a moment ago, the answer why something is great, but for the most part, people just kind of want to move on. They want to get stuff done, right? So that's the reason that we use software development kits and libraries and all that other stuff. We just want to, that's great. Let's just move on. We want to get stuff done. We want to get something out the door. So. So this is awesome. So let's talk about that. Let's show the code next time.
Absolutely.
And then I'm going to put this question to the panel. Ed and I were talking about this earlier. What do you guys want to talk about next time? Because there is we'll put a link in the show notes. There is a forum thread that has a bunch of topic suggestions. One of those, of course, a popular one is business app development. Creating business apps. And Ed and I were talking about Rob Miracle's example that's out on GitHub that was updated last year that has a bunch of different examples of maps and tabs and widgets and all this other stuff. But is there anything in particular that comes to mind that you guys would be interested in talking about next week? I'm putting y'all on the spot.
Yeah, you're definitely on the spot. So come up with something right now.
Yeah. And if you don't have something right this instant, that's okay. You can go look at the thread in the forum and just let us know what you want to talk about, and then we'll announce it, at the end of the week like we always do. But this is an opportunity to kind of tailor the conversation to maybe something that interests us at the moment, and maybe just to draw something off this list that other people had told us they want to talk about. There's lots of great stuff there.
I'm showing the thread right now. and then I'm kind of zooming out. So as you can see, as of 21 March, we've already got like a couple dozen items, and then new ones have been added. I didn't update the list, but we're looking for something everybody can kind of get together and talk about, right?
Yeah, yeah. And there's some of this stuff. It's like I think I saw one a moment ago was like marketing tools. That's a pretty broad topic. So we would probably pick a piece of that. Design patterns. That's another one. It's like really big, right? So we would probably narrow it down to a specific thing, kind of like we did with the game mechanics. Rather than go through an entire app end to end and show you all the different pieces. We probably just want to focus on a core mechanic. So for these particular topics, we might focus in on a specific aspect of it, like using the map. We might would look at specifically how to put markers on a map, and not necessarily cover every element of using the map widgets.
You just said something that actually tripped an idea for me, and I think it would really resonate here. Is we've got experts who are on the panel every week.
Mm-hmm.
And I tend to be the more talkative one, and I don't want to be like, hey, my way is the only way. And design patterns. You know what I would love to see? I would love to see us choose a small set of things, like how does Sergey make his modules? How does Jason set up his composer scenes? Choose some common ones, like composer scenes, modules, some other things. And then each of us comes and say, well, this is the way I do mine, and this is why I do it. Because I think that would be valuable to new users in the sense that they could see some variations and really get the sense of you need to organize your code, and you can choose one of these, but you need to be organized. And I'd also get to learn some of the secret sauce from other people, because I know for a fact, like Sergey, about a month ago, I was given a composer example, and he says, no, I don't do it that way. And I'm like, oh yeah? And he says, well, I do it this way. And I think, oh yeah, shoot, that's a good. Why didn't I do it that way?
Yeah, and that's exactly it. I mean, that's really the entire purpose of Corona Geek is for everyone to. It's like show and tell. It's like we're all kind of like say, hey, this is the way I do this, and then we're supposed to learn from each other. So absolutely, yeah. So if you guys are interested in doing something like that, let us know.
Design patterns. Topics would be a real nice thing, and we might want to put something together eventually that can be published for people to reference then.
Yeah, we could definitely put this in a permanent place.
Well, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll put a link in the show notes. I think Ed has already. I don't know if Hangouts. I'll go ahead and put it in the chat right now, just in case whoever's on the for everyone on the panel, not for whoever, for everyone on the panel. You can kind of look at that list there, and let us know what topics you want to talk about. So we'll figure that out, and we'll announce it at the end of the week. How's that?
I'm still reading Sergey's comment, and you're killing me, Sergey.
I know it. There's a whole conversation going on the other side there. I love it. And of course, WWDC just dropped, and everybody's trying to figure out what all this stuff means and what was noteworthy and what wasn't. And so it's fun. If you haven't joined us, if you're listening and you haven't joined us on the panel, I definitely invite you to do so. Anyone can join the panel at any time. I mean, the link that we share is to the panel. The only thing that's limiting is Google Hangouts limits us to 10 people, which usually means 9 other people and myself, just because I opened the show. But that's plenty of space to participate and come and be a part of the conversation. So you're always welcome to join us anytime. And with that, I'm going to leave it there and say thanks for joining us this week. And we'll be back here next Monday at 12 p.m. Pacific to talk all about mobile app development using Corona SDK. Be sure to check the show notes for today's show to all the links to the code and everything. And happy coding.
I do.
Bye.